Welcome and well met, all my fellow adventurers. Thank you for joining me here today for our next video where we will be discussing more predictions that could be coming our way. Now, with all the excitement of Dawntrail, I couldn't help but feel that the final patch for Endwalker got overlooked somewhat. So today we're going to talk a little more about what I feel might be coming for us in closing up the story from the old saga and how it may relate to opening up the new one. Now, we don't have an exact date for 6.5 just yet, but we do know that it is coming out early October. If I had to guess, I would say either the 3rd or the 10th as my best guess. Though we did get some information from the FanFest, and we know it's going to be called Growing Light, which could be a reference to a lot of things. Personally, I feel like it means that we are going to be bringing light back to the 13th. And yes, this is going to be the final major patch before the next expansion, and it will be divided into parts 1 and 2, as is tradition with the X.5 patches. We will be getting part 1 in October, while part 2 will be coming out at a later date, probably sometime in early 2024. So, how are we going to go from fighting to prevent an invasion of Voidsents coming to the source, to suddenly going off on a vacation to the new world? For the time being, we really have only the barest of ideas. We do know that we are getting a new dungeon, which is going to be called the Lunar Subterrane, which for those fans of Final Fantasy IV are probably thrilled from hearing all that. And we are going to be facing off against Zeromus for the final trial of Endwalker, the Abyssal Fracture. We also did get a couple screenshots for the MSQ, which got a lot of people really excited. The first one was pretty tame, as it only showed Y'shtola with Vitra, didn't really tell us much. But the second one, well, it showed us with Reen, in the first, with Zero of all people. So, what's going on here? Just what is happening in this story now, and how does it intend to wrap itself up? Well, first things first, I do think that we will be wrapping up the Void Arc. That's Arc with a C, not Arc with a K, with part 1. Meaning we will be going back to the 13th, ultimately tying up all the loose ends with Golbez, Azdaja's fate, and the future for the 13th for part 1. And then months after that, for part 2, for the 6.5 patch, it's going to be building up towards the whole concept of going to the new world, possibly introducing new characters, and at least getting a idea to why we're going off to Taral. So since part 2 could be about anything at all at this point, we're going to focus on part 1, and that's the concept to how the story with the 13th could possibly end. Now, quick recap, as we know from 6.4, we were able to make it to the moon of the 13th by going through our own moon and creating a massive portal that used to be Zodiark's prison. When we got there, we were able to locate Azdaja, but she was still imprisoned within Golbez's spell, which ironically was the only thing keeping her from turning into a full Voidsent at that point. While we are searching for a way to free her, Golbez finds us, releases Azdaja, who abruptly turns into a Voidsent right then and there, and then he battles with us before we defeat him. But though he lost the battle, he didn't lose the war, as they say. He casts Azdaja into the pit where the remains of Zodiark's ether resides, and she fuses together to become another powerful Voidsent, Zeromus. Which, again, Final Fantasy IV fans must be losing their minds, and as I said before, it is confirmed that we are going to be fighting him in the next patch. After we return to the source, Zero, surprisingly, is the one who gives Vitra hope that his sister can still be saved despite everything that happened. Provided that we can defeat Zeromus, and given the nature of the 13th, after he's defeated, then all the souls trapped inside him would be free to reform once again, provided that she can remember who she is. Yet, in order to even get that far, Y'shtola states that to pierce through such darkness, we would need to wield light, and so she plans to find a way to use the excess light of the first to help us in this matter. Well, that's all well and good, but while I agree that saving Azdaja is one of our top priorities, it's not the real problem here. No, let me explain what the problem is. Even if we manage to fight and defeat Zeromus, best case is that we defeat him, we free Azdaja, and somehow we restore her to her senses. Not sure how we do that yet, but hey, I digress. The point that I'm trying to make here is that even if we do get that far, because we're fighting him in the 13th, Zeromus is still going to come back. That's the problem here, in that so long as we're in the 13th, it doesn't matter how many times we beat him. Because the life stream is so messed up, death isn't really an option in this place. So we would be stuck having to fight him again and again. No, the only option that we have to work all of this out is if we defeat Zeromus, and after Azdaja reemerges, then by some miracle we restore light to the 13th before Zeromus reforms, and by doing this, what's left of Zeromus will be allowed to rest once and for all, along with maybe all the other Voidsents who could die in this world. That's really the only way I see that we can prevent any other invasions, both now and in the far-off future. So, yeah, basically, restoring the laws of life and death to a world that no longer has it is a tall order. How are we supposed to do that? Best option that we have right now for that is that we can restore maybe a small part of the 13th, like what we did with Eden, only maybe with a smaller scale, and it will eventually spread out, life will be restored eventually, though probably not for the foreseeable future. I can see them doing this because that way they can still have Voidsent in the story, and there will still be that faint hope that life will flourish here again one day. Probably by us handing off looking after this world to Silva and Unicalhi down the line at some point. Though that still leaves another problem in that unless we can reverse the transformation and return the Voidsent to actual people, then it might not matter if we restore the light, because the Voidsent are just going to continue to eat ether until there's nothing left. Life can't thrive with so many Voidsent who can only think about feeding their appetite for ether now. Meaning, we would have to find a way to deal with at least most of the Voidsent at this point before we can have any plausible future for this place. Besides, I'm sure that plenty of them wouldn't mind dying and being allowed to rest anyway, so it's probably a kindness if we do that anyway. So, how will we go about restoring the light, first of all? Well, the most obvious answer to that would be involving the First, and how it still has that excess of light. Remember what Oddbird said back in Heavensward, that the First was more in balance with light, so that it didn't take much to tip the scales and trigger the flood. Most of the light has already been dealt with, though, having been absorbed by the Warrior of Light and later used in our battle with Emixelk. But this world still has plenty of light that we can still use, which is why we see the screenshot of us back on the First. Still not sure how Zero got there, but then again, she is part Voidsent, so she may be able to tag along with the Warrior of Light like how she did with Xenos, however unwillingly that was. But how will bringing Zero to the First actually help? Well, I do have a friend who suggested that maybe we could use the crystallized wave in Amarang, since that's where Menphilia appeared and that's where the light seemed to be the strongest. Or we could look into something like maybe using the Crystal Tower as some kind of way to channel the light to the 13th, or use some kind of auracite to carry enough back to form some kind of weapon to cut through the darkness around Zeromus. Sadly, we just don't know enough yet to make any real predictions to how that's going to go. But does this mean that all that excess light of the First will be enough to restore the 13th? Well, I doubt it. Remember, it only took a single light warden to light up the sky in a single zone. There aren't such powerful Sin Eaters like that around anymore. Even Reen comments on this, saying, "Few as they are now," meaning that the Sin Eaters have really died down since the return of night. Not extinct, just a lot less than before. I'm sure that there are still plenty flying about over parts of the empty, but otherwise they aren't such a big issue anymore. So even if we help ourselves to all that extra light, I doubt that it's going to be enough to restore light to the entirety of the 13th. And if we risk taking too much light, then we could throw out the balance once again in the First, and I don't think we want to risk that. No, I think we can only help ourselves to just the excess light that was left over from the flood and no more. Still, how much could that realistically do? Assuming we can still find a vessel to contain the light without the Warrior of Light resorting to being made into a living light box again, we bring the excess light back to the 13th. And we could probably use the light to pierce through Zeromus, and I definitely see it being used as part of our battle with him, but again, even if we do all of that, he's still going to come back if we don't get the life stream flowing again and readdressing the balance. There is one theory that I have been thinking about for a long time now, and I do believe that it could work. During an interview months ago, Yoshi P stated that they did plan to end the final patch of Endwalker with a big event. They didn't say what it was about or any other real details about it because the dev team was keeping that all very hush-hush. And though I know I have mentioned this several times in the past, but damn it, I will stick with it until Square Enix proves me wrong. And that is that we are going to use the moon as a way to restore the light by crashing it into the world itself. Just hear me out before writing me off as crazy or highly destructive, which both are true, but you know what I mean. Because whether we like it or not, the moon didn't always exist in the sky. It was made by Vana after she became Heidelin to contain the fragments of Zodiark. The moon is just like the empty in the first because it's made out of light-aspected ether. And light-aspected ether is what rules here. Maybe not to the same severity as it did on the empty, pre-Eden, but rules enough so that the laws of light, such as stagnation, are easily seen. That's why nothing really grows here. So in other words, it was made from pure light ether and creation magics, which we can use to light up the world, so to speak. Or at least heal it enough to get the life stream flowing again. Sure, the moon turned red, which I'm still not sure how that works out, but all that light had to go somewhere. Maybe it's deeply trapped within the moon itself. That could be why we venture underground, because the screenshots from the new dungeon do look scarlet, leading me to believe that yes, it may be happening in the 13th, and we have to head into the lunar subterrane to find that potential light. And then maybe by crashing the moon into the world, we create a calamity of giant proportions that not only does it free all that trapped light, it wipes out most of the void sent for us anyway. And you know what? We may not even need to crash the moon itself, maybe just release it all like a laser beam. I mean, if we can send one up to the moon, then I think it's very reasonable we can send it back. Plus, A Realm Reborn did start off with a moon crashing into the world, so I appreciate the poetic irony here. So here's what I think how the MSQ is going to go, at least the basic idea. I think that it's going to start off with Y'shtola making the connection of potential light being trapped in the moon, and we're going to have to find a way to reawaken it because she's going to be aware of how tricky it is to defeat Zeromus and make sure that he stays down while saving Azdaja. So the Warrior of Light and Zero decide to head off to the first. Maybe they could use Zero's powers to somehow crystallize light and bring it back with us, and that could be used as some kind of weapon. But while we're heading back to the 13th, maybe we speak with the Watcher, who tells us that there should have been a Watcher on the 13th moon as well. We still had that flashback with Golbez standing over someone who looks an awful lot like the Watcher, though we have no idea what that's actually about. So that's maybe where Y'shtola makes the connection that there is potential light trapped in the moon itself, so we have to find some way to get to it. So our goals change. We head back to the 13th, but with Golbez probably fawning over Zeromus, probably doesn't notice us at first. So instead, we head inside the moon to find the trapped light. Once we discover it, we decide to head topside to face off against Zeromus, whose death could be somehow used to trigger the release of light itself, while also freeing Azdaja. And maybe if Zeromus does get blasted with a powerful burst of light, that could be enough to restore Azdaja to her senses. Like, it might even be able to cure her completely. I wouldn't go that far to say that it would, but it's definitely a possibility. Also, I do think that we will be getting help from an unexpected ally here as well, and any Final Fantasy IV fans will probably know what I'm talking about. How back in 4, once Golbez had returned to his senses, he fought against Zeromus himself. And I think that Golbez will be helping us out this time as well, at least the 14th version of Golbez. Though, let me be clear, it's not the same Golbez we fought in the last patch. No, the real Golbez is what I'm talking about. If you were paying attention to the end of 6.4, then you would know that the Golbez we fought against didn't seem like he was the real one. Rather, it looked like it was Durante, his friend and comrade who traveled together with him across the 13th during the war. What happened to the real Golbez is something we don't know yet, but it seems that he was transformed into crystal probably sometime either shortly before or after the flood. We do know that Durante grieves for him. He built a grave for him, and according to Azdaja, he visited the grave quite often. I feel that he took up Golbez's name and armor so that his friend could still be the hero who shattered the wheel and saved the world. Yet recall what happened at the end of 6.4 before we return to the source. The Warrior of Lights found the crystal and had the vision of the past, and Zero was the one who took the crystal from them. But when she tried to fight against Zeromus, she dropped it. It dropped right into the ether that was still forming to create Zeromus, meaning that there is still a good chance that the real Golbez's soul is trapped in there as well. So here's what I think. That the real Golbez will help us to defeat Zeromus from within. If he's in there, then he probably has access to memories from both Azdaja and maybe even Zodiark. And he would be aware of what's going on, and he would want to stop his friend from attacking the source and bringing all that unnecessary death to innocent people. So during our battle, perhaps even after defeating Zeromus, we come in contact with the real Golbez, who I personally feel is actually the reincarnated shard of Azim from the 13th. A lot of people think that this is the case because the echo vision we had of him was from his point of view, and they claim that's never happened before. First off, that's wrong. It has happened before back in Shadowbringers when we had that vision of Graha in Fortem's Manor, but that's beside the point. I do think that he will be reaching out to us though because of our souls, and he would wish to help us. Does this mean that we will be getting another rejoining like what happened with Oddbert? Well, no, I don't think that's actually necessary at this point. It's possible, sure, but the circumstances with Oddbert joining with us were special to say the least. He rejoined with us so that he could help not only to save his world, but to stabilize the light that was trapped inside the Warrior of Light at the time. Here, we don't have that handicap, and I feel like it would be a pretty cheap move to do. Because we just don't know this Golbez. We know that he seemed to have been a good person, but that's pretty much it. I don't think it would be nearly as impactful as it was with Oddbert. Not only that, but if we can free him from the crystal, and given the nature of the 13th for the time being, it's possible he might be able to re-emerge as well. So while it's certainly possible another rejoining within the Warrior of Light could happen, I find it very unlikely. But then, even if what I say is completely true, and we do somehow manage to restore daylight, what's going to happen next? Because there would still be plenty of Void Sins around, and I don't think that we will be able to destroy all of them even if we do bring the moon down. So maybe for those of us who haven't completed any quests involving the Void, like the Void Arc or the Black Mage quest, we can still have that tied in, but we could take comfort in the knowledge that the 13th could still be on its way to healing. But again, that still begs the question that if everyone was transformed into Void Sins in this world, how could life ever start over again? The reason we were able to save the first is because it wasn't to the point that it was beyond salvaging. We still had something to work with here with the continent of Norvrant and a recoverable population of people. And by restoring the elements to the empty, we know that life will eventually go on. Sure, it may take a few decades, maybe even centuries, but life will thrive here again, and the people will continue to have children and expand out into the recovering lands. The 13th, though, it doesn't have that. Or does it? There's something else that I think we might be overlooking. We still have the moon, which was meant for travel. That's what the original purpose of the moon was for. Just in case mankind was not able to stop Meteon. Sure, we don't know if Loporrits existed on the 13th moon, but we know that the Watcher, at the very least, did. And we do have Easter eggs tied to Lunarians and Final Fantasy IV, so is it possible that an entire civilization could be sleeping on the moon? Perhaps the Loporrits were there at one point and they saw what was happening with the beginning of the flood, meaning that they tried to save as many people as they could. I mean, Golbez had to have found a way to travel between the world and the moon, right? Maybe he was brought up with other people to safety just before the flood hit. But the flood was even more powerful than they thought it would be, and it threatened maybe even the moon in some way. So we do know that the Loporrits can go into like a sleep hibernation in their pods, so why not do that on a much grander scale? Maybe this entire moon was somehow transformed into like a giant sleeping pod. and that just below the surface there could be an entire civilization of survivors from right before the flood hit, all of them in a powerful and deep slumber. That might explain why the moon transformed into a red color. Again, still don't know how that works, but also the sudden need to actually head underground, maybe not to just unlock the lights, but to wake the inhabitants up. They did say that halfway through the dungeon, things were going to make a drastic change, so that could be what's going on. Like the first half of the dungeon could be us running through like these scarlet covered walls deep underground, and then suddenly everything transforms into like maybe machines or like a crystalline view where everyone was like maybe trapped inside some kind of crystal or hibernation pods. It's certainly possible. This could be, though, just what the world needs to recover after we blast it with light and wipe out a lot of the void sense, clear the skies, all of that good stuff. Once all that's done, the balance could be restored so that we don't have to deal with Zeromus anymore, and the void sense would be allowed to rest in peace. The world can be given a chance to recover, and the people on the moon could return to settle at one point. Sure, it will take a long time, but it could still be done. Which leads me to the final topic for discussion, and that's the future for both Zero and Azdaja. First off, let's start with Zero. She's become a fan favorite during these patches, and we have to wonder what's going to happen to her even if we do manage to help the 13th. So assuming that everything works out perfectly, such as defeating Zeromus, saving Azdaja, restoring the life and death cycle, is the best case scenario. Well, from what I can tell, if Zero survives all that, then she has a choice to either stay behind on the 13th, maybe serving as kind of like a mentor or protector of her people, and sharing what she learned in the source with them, or she could return with her friends back to the source itself. And that's assuming if I'm right about the idea that there could still be people on the moon here. It is curious that we didn't see her appear in the Dawntrail trailer, not that that means much. I mean, we didn't see Alphino or Cryle either, and it was still only part of the trailer anyway. But when trying to look at this from all angles, I do think it could go either way, and I feel like I would be satisfied with either or. Personally though, I do think she will make the choice to remain behind in the 13th to help her world to heal, and again, I think she would act more as a role of an advisor, sharing the idea of trust among them and helping them to rebuild a new future. Besides, who says that we have to close the gate on the moon? This could be used for us to head off and visit her whenever we want. Maybe visit some other parts of the void in the future, like Zero's domain. And maybe even have new side content and new trials waiting for us there while we help her to restore her home. Maybe something like the Ishgardian Restoration. We could start to help restore a small part of a former village or town. That would definitely be something I would love to do. I do think that it's interesting that Yoshi P and the dev team were pleasantly surprised to find out she becomes such a big hit with fans though. Almost like they didn't consider her being popular past the Endwalker storyline and didn't even seem to consider putting her into the 7.0 storyline. So it could be like saying goodbye to what may be our final connection to Xenos. I mean, for all we know, there could still be a dramatic scene where it turns out that Zero is somehow the only one capable of removing all that darkness from Azdaja, but in the process she ends up being consumed by it, and it takes over her, and we end up losing her. Her whole arc up till now has been learning about trust, self-sacrificing, and giving your all for the team. So it could be that she'd be allowed to finally rest, and her soul could be the first soul to enter the life stream once it's restored. As for Azdaja, it's a little bit harder to try to decide upon what's going to happen to her because we saw her becoming a void sense, and she all but lost her mind at this point. Again, unless we know of a way to actually reverse the process, bringing her back might be difficult if not impossible for us to do. I think if we could just restore her to her senses, we could try to give her further treatment back on the source, just like what happened with Haldrick in the first. But either way, I think that the true suspense from what's going to happen in 6.5 is what's going to become of Zero and Azdaja, because their fates are the ones still up in the air. In either case, I do think that the current story with them is going to be wrapped up in part 1. Once that's settled, then that means that there will no longer be any major conflicts or drama to address, which could be the perfect starting point for something new. I'm sure that we will find trouble brewing at some point when we visit the new world, since trouble seems attracted to us like a moth to flame, but it won't be the world-ending type of trouble, at least not for a while. I think it's going to be more along the lines of kingdom versus kingdom. Maybe someone will try to awaken some ancient magic or technology for selfish purposes, and we're probably going to end up killing some powerful deities along the way. I think that our heading off to the new world is just the first step. Yoshi P did state in a recent interview that they plan things out for at least 2 more expansions after Dawntrail. Could definitely still be more on the table, just depending on how well received that Dawntrail goes. But I think it's safe to assume that we will be exploring at least the rest of the source, such as the upper part of the new world, and a future Mericidia expansion, which could have Vitra, Azdaja, and Tiamat likely to be major characters should that ever happen. Either way, we will find out at some point, and I can't wait to see what they have planned. Will it ever be able to top off the emotional roller coaster that we've had so far? I mean, I doubt it, but that doesn't mean that it won't still be fun, and I'm eager to see them try. Unfortunately for me, it does seem like I'm going to be in for this for the long haul, so I'm not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. So I think that should be everything for right now. So what do you all think? What do you think of my theories for 6.5? Did you enjoy them? Or do you think that I'm still crazy? Either way, I'm okay with it. But if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe down below and let me know some of your own theories. I'd love to hear them. But until next time, everyone, may you walk in the light of the crystal.